Slavery in medieval Italy was a complex and evolving institution shaped by economic needs, political changes, and religious influences. While slavery had declined in Western Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire, it never entirely disappeared. In Italy, particularly in cities like Venice, Genoa, and Florence, slavery persisted throughout the Middle Ages, primarily driven by trade, economic demands, and social hierarchies. The origins and nature of slavery during the early medieval period, much of the European slave trade involved prisoners of war, criminals, and people who had fallen into debt. However, by the 9th and 10th centuries, Italian merchants, especially in cities with strong maritime traditions, became heavily involved in the buying and selling of slaves. Many of these slaves were imported from Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa, creating a diverse and multi-ethnic slave population within Italian territories. The term slave itself comes from Slav, a reference to the large number of Slavic people who were captured and sold into servitude. Venetian and Genoese traders played a crucial role in this commerce, establishing networks that extended into the Byzantine Empire, Muslim territories, and even as far as the Black Sea region. These merchants often bought slaves from traders in the Ottoman Empire or the Crimean Khanate, and then transported them to Italy, Spain, and other parts of Western Europe, who were the slaves. Slaves in medieval Italy came from various backgrounds. Many were Slavic, Greek, Arab, or African, reflecting the extensive trade routes of Italian merchants. Some were former Muslims captured during conflicts between Christian and Muslim states, while others were Christians taken in raids or conflicts in Eastern Europe. Women and children were particularly vulnerable to enslavement. Female slaves were often employed as domestic servants, concubines, or wet nurses in wealthy households. Male slaves, on the other hand, were put to work in a variety of roles, from household service to agricultural labor, and even skilled trades. Unlike in ancient Rome, where large numbers of slaves worked on massive agricultural estates, medieval Italian slavery was more urban-centered, with slaves living and working in households, workshops, and merchant enterprises. Many slaves were also used in galley rowing, particularly in Venetian and Genoese fleets. This was a brutal and grueling form of slavery, as life on a galley ship was harsh, and many rowers did not survive long. Unlike domestic slaves, who had some interaction with their masters, and sometimes opportunities for freedom, galley slaves were often permanently bound to their condition. The legal and social status of slaves. Medieval Italian laws regarding slavery were complex and varied by region. While some laws recognized slavery as a legitimate institution, they also set certain limits on the treatment of slaves. For instance, in many cases, slaves could convert to Christianity, and in some instances, this could lead to their eventual manumission, freedom. However, this was not always guaranteed, and many remained enslaved even after conversion. Slaves were considered property, but they were often more integrated into households than in some other slave societies. In cities like Venice and Florence, it was not uncommon for slaves to live alongside free servants and even receive small wages. Some slaves could buy their freedom, and others were freed upon their master's death. The Catholic Church generally opposed the enslavement of fellow Christians, but did not extend the same protections to non-Christians, which allowed the slave trade to continue, especially with Muslim and pagan captives. In some cases, slaves could achieve a limited form of social mobility. Certain skilled slaves were valued for their craftsmanship or knowledge, and some became trusted household members. However, this was the exception rather than the rule, and most remained in a state of servitude for life, unless granted freedom by their owners. The decline of slavery in medieval Italy. By the late Middle Ages, slavery in Italy began to decline for several reasons. The growing use of paid labor, the influence of Christian teachings on the dignity of human beings, and the increasing economic prosperity of free workers made slavery less practical. Additionally, Italy's involvement in the transatlantic slave trade during the Renaissance and early modern period shifted the focus of European slavery from the Mediterranean to the Americas. Another factor in the decline of slavery was the increasing power of guilds in medieval Italian cities. These organizations, which controlled various trades and industries, generally favored free labor over slave labor. As merchant and artisan classes grew wealthier and more influential, they had less interest in maintaining a system that depended on slavery. While forms of servitude, such as indentured labor and serfdom, persisted, outright slavery became less common in Italy by the 15th and 16th centuries. The influence of Renaissance humanism, which emphasized individual dignity and freedom, also played a role in shaping attitudes towards slavery. Conclusion: slavery in medieval Italy was deeply tied to the economic and political realities of the time. It was not as widespread or brutal as in ancient Rome or later colonial slavery, but it remained a significant institution, particularly in urban centers. Over time, changing economic conditions and evolving moral perspectives led to its decline. However, the legacy of medieval slavery in Italy had long-lasting effects, influencing later systems of servitude and labor exploitation in Europe and beyond.